Good morning and good afternoon to all who are here at this seminar and the new people who are here for the first time for this interesting discussion. We will talk about LEDAs as motors of growth and sustainable urban development. I'm Maria Camila Uribe, coordinator of the Cities Network, and I would like to welcome you for this exchange of the experiences of different cities. We will inform you that this webinar will be mainly in English, but you will be able to hear through at the bottom of your screen and choosing the language of your preference. This event will be taped and it will be available in the YouTube channel of the IDB starting next week. The network is a platform to facilitate the knowledge exchange and experiences to confront the common challenges of Latin American cities, generating opportunities for dialogue through knowledge and exchange to identify common problems and solutions for capacity development. We will continue with a conversation that began before when we talked about the post-pandemic recovery, local development, employment, urban markets, the complexities of our cities for the development of long-term strategies. Local economic development agencies are dedicated to economic growth, to attract investments, and to generate jobs in the cities. These agencies are a useful tool to connect investment in infrastructure and urban generation, developing an ecosystem to link these urban strategies with the job market of the cities. Before we begin, let me tell you a bit about the format of the webinar and give you some administrative instructions. First, we will have the presentation by two experts in the global field, Kara McClure, Chief of the Local Employment Division of OCDE, and Dr. Detter, an expert in the use of assets in the cities. And then we will have presentations of Cecilia Kushner, Chief Strategy Officer of the New York City Development Corporation, and the Mayor of Cordoba in Argentina, Martin Yarriona. After that, we will have questions from the audience, which will be answered by the panelists. And please send your questions through the chat. And finally, to close, we will have Rafael Trillos Mata from Bidinvest, the private branch of the IDB, who will give us his vision. Don't forget that this webinar will be in English and Spanish. You will be able to follow in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. Just click in the globe at the bottom of your screen, and you can choose the language of your preference. To begin this webinar and this enriching dialogue, I hand the floor to Gilberto Chona, specialist from the urban development section of the IDB, who is preparing a publication of LEDAs. And we have been working with him for webinars and development of webinars for cities to strengthen capabilities in these urban areas. Thank you, and I hand the floor to Gilberto. Thank you very much, Maria Camila. Good morning, America. Good afternoon, Europe. Good night, Asia. The cities in Latin America and the Caribbean are challenged to recover economically after the COVID-19 pandemics. These are main agencies in the urban development for the territory of these cities, which are the center of economic activity, municipal management, and neighborhoods. Cities can promote strategies for a greater climate resilience, a greater social inclusion, and a greater productivity in their territories, improving the quality of life of the citizens. It is well known that Latin America and the Caribbean, 80% of the people are urban dwellers, and they generate at least 75% of the national GDP. This is why these urban development strategies could make use of innovations and business models to leave behind the health emergency and accelerate economic activity. At the same time, we are going into a post-pandemic era, and we need to make use of these resources. The Vision 2025 of the IDB, Reinvesting in the Americas, is geared towards a strong economic development for social progress and the strengthening of good governance and institutions. This vision coincides fully with the challenge of accelerating economic growth in our cities. The IDB is making a great effort to approach the governments, the communities, and the private sector in order to build frameworks, measures, and capabilities, reinforcing the capacity for economic growth and local productivity, taking into account resilience, sustainability, and social inclusion. And this is all geared towards making cities engines of growth. We need local economic development strategies. Why? Because these are strategies that cannot just be considered as a social and urban economic strategy. It should be the main strategy for economic growth in the territory for the cities and their surroundings. These strategies are opening new doors for growth and prosperity of people, and at the same time, they are improving national economic performance. This can produce jobs, it can reduce social inequality, and it can improve information flows for investors, improving productivity and competitiveness for the cities. We need local economic development agencies for the acceleration of growth. This is because these are a creative solution to a complex challenge. The challenges faced by cities are complex and they require creative solutions. In this context, these LEDAs, as we call them, are a creative and necessary solution. These are structures combining a focus of economic development integrated with urban development. COVID-19 showed us that it's necessary to build more agile institutions responding to the needs and the demands of the health, climate, and economic agencies. The value of the combined work, coordination, and management abilities, plus digitalization, are necessary traits for this new inclusiveness. Let us offer these traits through a structure of corporate governance that allows us to bring together new strategies for economic and social development with the participation of public and private sectors with a longer term vision. This is why they accelerate the economic development of cities. To discuss the actions of LEDAs and their potential to contribute to the growth of cities, we have an exchange with several high-level experts. Karen McGuire is our first speaker.
Karen will present on the strategic role that local economic development agencies can play in the post-pandemic next normal. Karen McGuire lidera un equipo que cubre los temas críticos.
She leads a team with critical issues such as labor market, culture and creative actions, global events, and others. The Economic Development and Local Jobs Program, LEEE, of the OCDE, which is supervised by Karen, has analyzed policies and development capabilities for national and subnational governments during 40 years. It was the first program which discussed this issue at the level of the organization and took these issues to the center of the discussion. The floor is yours, Karen.
Alberto, and I'm just going to share my screen, and apologies, I can listen in Spanish but need to speak in English. So pleasure to join you all virtually today. As Huberto just mentioned, the Local Employment and Economic Development Program is actually celebrating its 40th anniversary, and this is why I'm calling you from a hotel room in Cork, Ireland here, because it's an opportunity to celebrate really how important the OECD views local economic development, because this program was designed specifically to bring the OECD work to local communities and local voices to the OECD. And if you're interested, we have some panel sessions that will be live streamed or available on the web from this big event to celebrate 40 years of local development at the OECD. I just thought it would be helpful to start first with a little bit, since the topic is also on sort of post-COVID and how to manage in this environment. And I should preface this by saying, of course, that the OECD and the economic outlook that was just issued last week, right now, a lot of the emphasis is really even less on COVID and more so on rising inflation, fuel prices, and other disruptions in global supply chains that local economic development agencies are needing to think about. But I just wanted to flag, of course, that COVID-19 had some different impacts for cities than was the case in other forms of crises in terms of the sort of place dynamics. In terms of what are the sectors that can help in the rebound. In prior crises, often tourism was used, and that's definitely a challenge still today, but also who was affected. So the inclusion element associated with the COVID-19 and recovery that city local economic development agencies are confronting. So, I mean, the real question is sort of what trends have accelerated, decelerated, or shifting course in this post-COVID environment. I wanted to flag a few. First, of course, that the risk of automation for jobs. So the OECD and others calculate what share of jobs are likely to disappear because the tasks that they do are tasks that can be automated. And what we're seeing is actually that COVID-19 is making those figures a reality sooner than perhaps would have been before COVID-19 because of the special nature of this crisis. And then I also want to emphasize, of course, the teleworking, and of course, this is for certain types of jobs and not others, but it has been changing the face of cities around the world and what that can mean for the future of talent attraction. The green transition in the back of our minds, of course, for all of our different local economic development efforts and changes in what that means for consumer preferences in terms of where they buy and what they buy. And this can have a strong influence on sort of localization of different goods and services. And hence these global supply chains, in addition to thinking about in the background, what is it that firms are thinking about in terms of managing supply chain risk, and how is that going to influence what are my economic development opportunities locally? And of course, in terms of attracting investment and talent, you know, in terms of the talent side, of course, there are some other issues associated with global flows that will be taken into account in some of these calculations. And urbanization, all sorts of things to say on urbanization, but I think the focus here is going to be more, of course, on the economic development strategies. But again, lots of changes we are seeing in terms of urban planning and urban transport. So what I wanted to really focus on is local economic development agencies as really strategic drivers with convening power. And I really want to emphasize this convening power and of course, taking different legal forms in different countries and cities. But one of the things that we hear all the time is that they can help to cut across the policy silos in different areas of the public sector. And this plays a really important strategic role that these agencies can play. Another is in terms of the way that they can capitalize on private sector knowledge, money, and sort of just get it done kind of focus. And I remember talking with a local development agency that was sort of on the border border of the US and Mexico, and they were actually so tired and fed up with the public sector that they decided to create their own entirely private sector approach because of their desire to kind of move forward where they saw the critical factors for local economic development that they need for their firms. A big, of course, trend in terms of the role of higher education and training institutions and the many different roles that they can play in attracting investment, especially research intensive firms, and providing a talented workforce, and in playing all sorts of other roles to support local economic development efforts. And then increasingly civil society being engaged in terms of the buy-in with some of these big picture strategies. So I don't think this audience needs to be reminded of just how important local business conditions are for attracting investment, but also for growing from within. And here I want to emphasize this because a lot of the economic development agencies that we see are increasingly shifting not only from investment attraction, but also this emphasis on growing within. And in addition, I have the word clusters networks here on the screen. Different places are calling these different things, whether they're focusing on just trying to get some sort of critical mass or an economy of scale, or whether they're trying to increasingly bring together unique combinations of different technologies and sectors to get their competitive advantage, so an economy of scope, but these sort of unusual combinations that can then be internationally competitive. So they're coming under different forms and different names and innovation platforms and clusters, et cetera. I think we're all trying to talk about the same phenomena. And this is where it also helps with, importantly, the visibility internally and externally on what are these assets. And I just want to give a fun example of the identification of assets here, because Milwaukee in the United States, they have a water cluster. And if you use the traditional cluster mapping tools, you would never have found a water cluster. But it's really that local knowledge and local leaders that said, we have lots of water. We have water intensive manufacturing. We have great research. Let's develop and market this water cluster. And others in other states were actually jealous of their effectiveness. So again, these, the role of local economic development agencies in really helping to identify what these different unique combinations of local assets are, and then bringing the right people around the table. As part of this growing within, lots of different aspects of business development services, but also the idea of stimulating demand amongst the local firms to scale, to grow, to create jobs. And we have some work that if of interest to look at what are the sort of challenges that we see with SMEs, and then what are the kind of business development strategies some of these different agencies are using to help better ensure that SMEs are helping to grow and create jobs. And of course, statistically in the OECD, they tend to account for and create more of the new jobs. Wanted to focus also on the workforce development angle. We had a local skills week at the OECD recently, and Deputy Mayor Barcelona said talent is the new oil. And so what we're seeing also is a much stronger link between local economic development agencies and workforce development communities in order to ensure that they have a strong skills system, because it's the talent that a lot of these firms are looking for. And the ability to sort of keep up pace. I mean, there are some cities, they're saying like the demand sometimes for ICT skills, especially higher end skills as well, is so high that they can barely keep up. And so that competition for talent means that we also need to do a better job locally in ensuring that that talent pipeline is there. There's been a traditional focus on the high skilled workers, and I want to get to maybe a more inclusive vision in a second, but within the high skilled workers and even beyond, what we've seen with COVID-19 is also a change in the preferences of workers and what they're looking for. Even in Silicon Valley, people don't want to come back to the office, 5 days a week. And so these changing preferences are going to be, I think, part of the thinking in these economic development strategies. And this inclusive approach to talent, we're seeing a lot of middle skilled jobs that are going unfilled that are actually causing bottlenecks for local development efforts. And this can be a real problem. Logistics, public services that are important for local development, a lot of areas where we're seeing middle skilled job shortages. And this stark, and then also just quite challenges with stark inequality. And so opportunities to grow some of these entrepreneurs from those communities that tend to be unrepresented are increasingly viewed as part of these economic development strategies. And I just flag, because of cities with large informal economies, that some places are actively using what they call the social economy, so cooperatives, nonprofits, and others, to help with formalizing some of this employment and helping develop the talent pipeline. And I think I'm at time here, so just to conclude, I just wanted to mention, to be creative, and I mean that actually rather literally. And one of the reasons I say that is because a lot of cities are using, as part of their local economic development strategies, not only culture and creative sectors as a cluster, but as an underlying variable to help with innovation across their local economy, that also has all sorts of other urban regeneration benefits that can engage youth, that can contribute to well-being of people. And so we've seen this, for example, in Emilia-Romagna, in Italy, their regional development agency has put a very big accent on this as a way of capitalizing on local assets and promoting innovation. So lots of interesting trends around the OECD, and look forward to hearing from the other speakers as well about what they're doing and seeing, and to bringing back those examples to the OECD. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this interesting presentation. Muchas gracias, Karen, por una excelente presentación sobre
Thank you, Karen, for your interesting presentation on the roles and possibilities of the LEDAs from the point of view of the OECD. A clear and efficient corporate governance is fundamental for a successful LEDA. This is related to clear responsibilities and accountability, the fiscal relationship with the public sector and the government, and the attention to the needs of the communities. This corporate structure can vary from city to city, and it should be the one that is best adapted to the political and social context of the city, with a clear objective of economic development, autonomy for decision-making, capable of projecting this work further than the local political cycles, and with the ability to coordinate.
Hidden assets to boost economic growth and prosperity in cities in the post-pandemic, we will have Mr. Doug Detter. Doug Detter es el director principal de Detter & Company.
Detter is the CEO of Detter & Company, and he's also an advisor for McKinsey & Company, the Boston Consulting Big, Terra Firma Capital Partners, and Cushman & Wakefield. Doug has worked in more than 30 countries, and he has been a director of private companies all over the world. He developed the national portfolio of assets of Sweden, and it was the first attempt by a European government to approach the management of public companies and real estate. This led to an increase of the portfolio to double the value from what the local stock exchange had, and it increased fiscal space to finance investment projects and to promote economic development in Sweden. He is the author of the books The Public Wealth of Nations, which is acknowledged by the economists as the book of the years, as well as by the Financial Times, and also The Public Wealth of Cities. To talk about how to make use of these assets, we have Dr. Detter. The floor is yours, Mr. Detter.
You are in mute.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to jump directly into the topic, which is how to manage public assets for cities. Sorry, oh, I better. Okay. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, good. There we go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just being a bit technical. So there's a huge opportunities for cities to develop their hidden assets. I say hidden because most of these assets are unknown and unregistered and untapped by most cities in the world. We are talking about both real estate and operational assets like subways, airports, etc. But if you just look at the real estate, which is probably the most hidden asset of all, it's a virtual gold mine worth 1 times the economic output of every city in the world. And that represents about 50% of the total market value of the real estate market. And these are both hidden and unregistered and unaccounted for. So even in a place like Pittsburgh, the market value, when we do these evaluations, we found that the market value in Pittsburgh, which is probably the best example or the worst example so far, that was 70 times the book value that was registered in the books of the city. Why is this important? Why is it important to find the assets and start managing them and developing that? Because that can create money that can pay for other investments in the city. It can avoid that you have a debt problem. So anything like, what has been happening with places like Detroit is absolutely unnecessary if you take this into account. It will also improve the productivity because a lot of these assets are very important for the city's economic growth and investment, and it will reduce fiscal risk and corruption to the benefit of society as a whole. This has been done for at least 100 years, probably 130 years, 50 years. And one of the best examples is Singapore, that was once a developed country with the same metrics as Jamaica 50 years ago. Today, it has, in a single generation, brought itself from a developing country to a developed economy in less than 50 years, or I would say 30 years. It's done this by setting up professional management of its public assets, most notably the Temasek, which has had a return on equity of more than 14% for 46 years, and has created world-leading industries, what was once just a British garrison town 50 years ago. And it pays billions of dollars in dividends to the government that the government is then using for other things in the country, including housing. The government has provided, more than 80% of the population with housing, public housing. And it's probably the most successful housing development program in the world. I have never seen anything like it. Even in socialist Sweden, the government is only providing 50% of the population with housing. You have other examples, like Hong Kong has created probably the best subway system and railway system in the world, the size of New York City, without spending one tax dollar. Everything is done by developing real estate above the stations. In Sweden, we did something similar when we almost went bankrupt in the 90s. We turned around the whole portfolio and managed to increase growth and created a lot of dividends to the government that basically saved the economy. We created from these companies and from the real estate, we created what you could say are Silicon Valleys in the middle of the city of Stockholm, new city centers in all the major cities. We doubled the capacity of the railway system, built out the subway without spending any tax dollars, and paid huge dividends to the government. The UK has done something similar with their railway stations, which helped pay for the Olympics in 2012, and has turned around many derelict areas in London in this way. Hamburg turned around its old harbor that was not useful anymore because the new technology of containers, etc., made it obsolete, and instead created new educational facilities from kindergartens to universities, workspaces, and tens of thousands of residential units. Same thing in Copenhagen with their harbor, but almost twice as large development, and without any tax money. Again, the secret is to create a holding company, an independent holding company at an arm's length from short-term political influence, with proper accounting and a commercial objective. And this is important partly because governments are not created to handle commercial risk. And this is at the heart of why there's always a scandal when the private sector deals with the public sector. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same kind of accounting to start with. Public sector accounting does not allow for fair market value, as we saw with Pittsburgh, which is a very bad example, but I see this in every city around the world, in developing countries or developed economies, it doesn't matter. And probably the most famous example in the academic world is the municipal school of Cicero Pena at Copacabana, which sits there, a 3-story building among skyscrapers of 5-story hotels along Copacabana, which is the most expensive location in Brazil. After 30 years, that has now been moved, and the municipality is instead developing a hotel without selling, and thereby giving a better surroundings for the pupils, and earning money from renting this place out to hotel that could service both schools, hospitals, and transportations for the city. The problem with the accounting is that when you don't have a fair market value, you don't see, there's no alarm bell that you're not using your assets properly. Why it's necessary to change to accrual accounting. This can take time. So the best way is to create a holding company or to do an asset map, find the assets, and then create a holding company that can act and smell like a private sector vehicle. And in this way, you start speaking the same language, you have the ability to manage commercial risk, and you can play and have the same capacity as the private sector, and thereby avoid an undue transfer of public wealth to the private sector, which is always the case otherwise, when the public sector enters into PPP, private sector partnership, public-private partnership, or privatizations, which is in the private sector always the joke that this is the best way to get rich is to buy property from the public sector, because the public sector don't have a clue at what price they're selling. And in this holding company, it's possible to develop assets just as if you are a private sector company. And either you enjoy the yield from that development, or if it's excess property or assets, you can sell them, but then you sell them at a full market value and not like the public sector entities usually do, at a discount or fire sale, or unknown to the politicians or stakeholders and taxpayers what the real value actually is. And the best way to start this is to do an asset map, which is an indicative feasibility study. And this is not a very difficult process. It could take a few weeks for a city, or even a few days if your data is comprehensive. And from there on, it's possible to then determine what assets would be suitable to put into a holding company and start managing and develop as if you are a private sector owner of this without privatizing. And this would be to the benefit of society as a whole, instead of what is otherwise the risk that you transfer, have an undue transfer of public wealth to the private sector. Thank you. That's it.
Muchas gracias, Mr. Detter, de su presentación.
Thank you very much, Mr. Detter. From your presentation, we see that there's a triple task for local economic development agencies: identifying active assets, account for them adequately, and develop them commercially, generating the greatest number of benefits for citizens, but avoiding any negative social events, such as gentrification in the commercial development of those assets. Now we will move in the second part of the webinar to the practice. We'll see what those who are leading local economic development agencies say. NYC EDC has the mission of creating shared prosperity in the 5 boroughs of New York City by strengthening neighborhoods, economic growth, and the generation of good jobs. This EDC is structured as a non-for-profit private company. NYC EDC can complete its project more efficiently because it's not subject to the same set of regulations and operational requirements to which other public agencies in New York are subject.
To talk to us about how can an agency like New York NYC EDC reactivate economic growth in New York City after the pandemic, we have Cecilia Kushner. Cecilia es actualmente la directora de estrategia de la Corporación de Desarrollo Económico de la Ciudad de Nueva York.
Cecilia Kushner is currently the strategy director of EDC in New York. She leads multidisciplinary teams to implement projects and programs focused on developing emergent sectors. Before her current position, Cecilia spent more than 10 years working for New York City in different programs and policies in the areas of infrastructure, transit operations, use of soil, and community development, and most recently as the executive VIP of planning and ferry in the ferry of NYC EDC, and prior to that in the urban planning department at Brooklands and also in resilience. Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be with all of you. So I'll be talking about how New York City and especially EDC, so we are the Economic Local Development Corporation, is working to recover from COVID-19. So just a little bit of context. These are basically the numbers that we're continuously looking at. We are adding jobs, and so we're going in the right direction. We have not recovered all of the jobs that we had in 2019, but we are successfully adding jobs, and especially private jobs, every single month. Tourism is back. Tourism is a huge part of New York City's economy and really helps support the hotel industry, the entertainment, and the cultural industry. So we're very excited to see people come back to the city. And then there's still some work to do. Return to office is really lagging. We have very large commercial districts in Manhattan, and a lot of our commercial base is based on these commercial districts being healthy and property taxes flowing. And so this is something we very closely keeping tabs of, and the mayor is really a champion of return to office. And then we're seeing unemployment being very disparate racially across the city, with Black New Yorkers being a lot more unemployed than the rest of the city as a whole. So making sure that we recoup jobs and that these jobs are being felt and held by the diversity of New York City population is a core goal of us. And then we've lost a lot of small businesses, like a lot of very large cities during COVID, and we're not completely rebounded to the baseline of small businesses that we had. So we're very focused on that as well. So we have a new administration that came in January. Our deputy mayor and our mayor released an economic recovery blueprint. These are like the main principles. So restarting the city's economic engine, supporting small businesses, driving inclusive sector growth, and I'll talk about that, connecting New Yorkers to job, and then really always thinking about the future. So not just doing kind of small term, short term tactics, but really making sure that everything that we do now builds upon what we would want the city to look like in 5 to 10 years. And then at EDC here, we're very large asset owners. We own 66 million square feet of real estate across the city, mainly industrial and commercial real estate. So really leveraging our assets towards economic development and recovery, making sure that we create quality jobs, and then the rest of the goals that you see on the slides here. So as I said, we have a lot of assets. We're very focused on creating jobs, but as I like to say, we're trying to be future oriented. So we want to create the jobs of tomorrow. So we're continuously looking, and I'll talk a little bit about that, on what are the industries of the future that are growing globally and where New York City should get its market share. So two of the ones that I'll discuss is life science, so biotech, and then offshore wind, and at large, the green economy. So we're trying to think of a framework that really makes sure that we take advantage of being a very large city, where each and every single one of our strategies should have an asset component. So we're really taking advantage of the fact that we're a very large landlord and have a lot of buildings that we can tap to be part of the future of our economy, to looking at neighborhoods. One thing that was really important during COVID is how New Yorkers lived in like a smaller geography. And so we've seen some neighborhoods succeed and some neighborhoods not succeed. So really thinking about like what makes a neighborhood a healthy neighborhood and a good neighborhood for economic development. And then citywide, how it can support emerging industries. As I said, everything we do, we really want to have like a long-term vision for what the city ought to be doing. So this afternoon, we're convening what we call the New New York panel, which are 53 civic leaders, business leaders, no elected official except the mayor and the governor are convening it. And the idea is really to bring all of these bright brains that have a stake in the future of the city to really define what we think New York City should look like in 5 to 10 years, really focused on our commercial districts. So how do we reinvent them? How do we transform them? What is the future of working looking like? what the new industries are going to want to see in New York City, and how we can make sure that everything that we do builds toward this greater goal. On life science, which is a very key interest of ours, because it's a very large growing sector in the US. And we want to make sure that New York City is competitive. Right now, Boston is the city that has the most life science jobs. So we're looking, and these are just some stats about life science, where we have like set very clear goals for ourselves on the number of jobs and the number of companies that we want to see over the next 10 years. So we were trying to be very goal and outcome oriented. So we're very clear as to what success looks like and what our investment is supposed to buy at the end of the day. And so we're making investments on a place-based basis. So we're trying to really create clusters. One of the things we really learned, especially about the new economy and new sectors that are growing, because we're an extremely large city, people want to feel in new sectors that they are colliding with each other, that they're exchanging ideas. So they really need to be co-located in order to succeed. And as the sector grows, it is fine for it to then take over the entire city and to be part of most neighborhoods. But at the beginning, it's really, this co-location is really important. So we're really trying to be focused and surgical in the types of investment that we do to make sure that this co-location occurs. Offshore wind is another example. As Karen mentioned, like the green economy and shift in infrastructure and energy is going to be a huge part of what drives economic development in urban areas and across the nation overall. And so similarly, we're really focusing on our assets, which ones are the ones that are like the most ripe, the most likely to be able to support this new industry. And at the same time, making a lot of investment in workforce development to make sure that these future jobs, local neighborhoods and New Yorkers are actually ready for them. So it's a tripart investment, which is sites, workforce and business, and research and development to make sure that the best and brightest of the innovation in that particular sector occurs in New York City, as opposed to being brought from other places to New York City. Another example here is Hunts Point in the Bronx. We are the asset owner of the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center, which is the largest food distribution center in the nation. So we're doubling down, making a lot of investment in the produce market there to make sure that we continue to create good jobs, as well as making improvement throughout the entire neighborhood, which is a very low-income community of color that is not seeing the benefit of these enormous assets being right next to them. So each time we have an asset-based approach, we also want to make sure that we have a neighborhood approach surrounding it. As I said, we're continuously trying to focus on emerging industries, where we have a research group that is continuously diligencing where we see job growth. So a few here that are emerging as being important. One is cannabis, which is being decriminalized and legalized in New York State. So making sure that we set up this economy for the future in the right way. Another one, as I mentioned, is the green economy, offshore wind being one sector, but not all. We're going to have a lot of buildings that will need to be retrofitted to be able to be compliant with new regulation. So that's going to be really important for us. And then tech. Tech has been growing enormously in New York City, but we're seeing a lot of new aspects of tech, blockchain, fintech, health tech. Tech is now disrupting every single traditional sector. So making sure that we are part of this and helping growing this. And so, as I said, we're always trying to create economic clusters. So industry, academia, workforce are really in a place and feel like they are talking to each other, because we think this is the best way to grow an economy, is from a place outwards. And it's the best place for innovation to occur. So two examples here, one in the Bronx, Morris Park, where we're looking at public health, because there's a large cluster of hospitals there. And another one where we are trying to move city agencies' real estate into neighborhoods that have potential for commercial hubs, so that the city can be a first mover in creating a market in these neighborhoods and actually having workers in these neighborhoods where the existing commercial market would not yet support kind of ground up development for offices. So really trying to leverage the city's assets towards strategic outcomes. And then finally, because of COVID, we've gone back to a tool that the city hadn't used in a very long time, which is just good old business development, and trying to make sure that like firms that are interested in coming to New York know how to navigate the city. I think what we found generally is that a lot of companies are interested in coming to New York because we have such a great talent. I think Karen was right, like talent is the new oil. Like this is what we're hearing left and right, both talent and diversity. Firms want to have a diverse workforce, and New York City, because it is one of the most diverse city in the entire globe, offers that. However, we're a very hard city to navigate in terms of real estate, in terms of regulation, in terms of workforce offering. And so we're creating a team that is going to provide technical assistance and like kind of a concierge approach to companies that want to come to New York City to help them navigate all of these issues and be able to make New York City their home. And we're very excited about starting this new project. That is it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cecilia. A very impressive portfolio, very impressive initiatives. La ciudad de Nueva York muestra cómo
New York City shows how structured focus with a high coordination and a long-term focus in the welfare or well-being of its inhabitants yields actual results for the city. Now, in the second part, we will listen to the mayor of the city of Córdoba, who will talk to us about how they are applying the local development focus through an agency in Córdoba, Argentina. The vision of ADEC, a local development agency in Córdoba, is to generate sustainable economic development in Córdoba and its metropolitan area. It's constituted by more than 40 entities, universities, professional colleges, and the mayor's office. This structure makes it possible to conduct pre-feasibility studies for the underutilized urban spaces, such as the location and promotion of investment in clusters in priority businesses in line with the metropolitan economic development. In the case of ABEC, the collaboration amid federal, provincial, and local administrations, and also with the participation of the private sector in the commercial development of assets, it's key to implement good urban regeneration projects. To talk about how to reactivate the economic growth after the pandemic in the city of Córdoba in Argentina, we are privileged to have its mayor, Martín Giargiora, current mayor of Córdoba for 2019-2023, and the chairman of the Córdoba Economic Development Agency, ADEC. He has a degree from the Catholic University of Córdoba, and he's also a lawyer. He has been the mayor of the city of San Francisco in Córdoba between 2003 and 2011. In 2011, he was chosen as the chairman of the Justicialist Party and re-elected as San Francisco mayor. In December 2013, he became the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Mining, and Scientific Development of the province of Córdoba. In 2017, he was chosen as a representative to the national parliament, and in 2019, he was chosen as the mayor of the city of Córdoba. Martín, the floor is yours. First of all, I would like to thank the IDB for the invitation to these fora, which allow us to exchange appearances. Thank you, Maria Camila, for inviting us to participate here. Thanks, Gilberto. And for me, it's also a pleasure to be with all of you. First of all, I would like to ratify the concept about the importance of development agencies. ADEC is an agency created in 1997 as a result of an urban development plan that has been generating initiatives that have benefited different economic and social sectors in our city. It started with a PPP and different entities that reached an important number of members, and it also included academic and university sectors. This ADEC agencies allows us to have different projects. I was listening to Cecilia addressing growth project. ADEC has the same development focus, and it has different programs constantly, and each experience yields useful lessons. ADEC dates back to 25 years ago, so it has programs and studies that it can continue applying beyond any political mandate. When I became mayor, I analyzed many studies ordered by ADEC to different universities to establish a baseline to develop all other projects, as you also indicated, as a future blueprint for the urban development of our city as a first milestone. And ADEC has been very active. I would also like to say what Karen said also, to accompany a fundamental value that ADEC has in this public-private work, in that potential of ADEC. We legitimize public policies. That's a big asset. This is something that we emphasize on. And all previous speakers have also emphasized this. For us, this has been essential. Anyway, during the pandemic, ADEC had an essential role during the pandemic. ADEC worked and helped us not only in applying public policy to fight against the pandemic, but we needed to develop protocols by activity, but not only protocols by activity in the middle of the pandemic and the difficult measures that we mayors had to take on behalf of our neighbors' health. The most important thing was how these protocols were developed, taking into account the health area and the public area, but how were they taken to each industrial level? And there's a great recognition of public recognition of so many years of work, and the prestige of our development agency is that prestige was what allowed us to disseminate and apply our protocols to each sector without ADEC. And in the middle of the pandemic crisis, in the middle of what discussions of what protocols to apply or not, it was ADEC from Cordoba that the one that allowed us to reach each economic sector and apply the protocols. They applied technology and training courses.
Impresionante. De hecho, también la DEC demostró en Córdoba su posibilidad de
And
innovación.
also in Cordoba, LEDAC showed its possibilities of innovation. We had to develop a fifth World Forum on the issue of local economic development. And LEDAC did so in a virtual way because we couldn't meet in person. So this is the value of LEDAC and we cannot give you more details because we don't have enough time. But LADEC is an agency that has an economic vision in the long term, and it starts to serve as an engine for local development. And I would like to underscore the historic role played by LADEC in the midst of the pandemics. Today, we are starting to live in a post-pandemic world, and LADEC is performing a job of strategic planning, and it's working on a series of projects that were mentioned by you. The future of jobs, productive reconstruction after the pandemics, digital transformation, circular economy, the international presence of our city in the world economy. So these are a series of projects, but I would like to point out two with some figures so that we cannot, so we do not exceed the time allotted. The pandemic affected all of us. We had to work at a very high speed in several sectors. But one of the main issues in which we focused was the improvement of competitiveness. And for this, we looked at a series of tasks that we had pending. We are now going through a technological transformation for e-commerce through web, constructions, jobs for building, the issuance of driver's licenses through the web. So this is to follow up with the actions of the private sector in from the point of view of the public sector. So for anyone who wants to learn after the pandemics, one of the most important things is how to introduce massive technology use for the benefit of the people, and the government had to be part of this process. This allows an entrepreneur to include or incorporate rapidly, and we were able to do so because LADEC had been working on the idea of a single window, the possibility of improving the environment for entrepreneurship, and we led this into an effort to transform our businesses digitally. So productive sectors were accompanied by LADEC, and we facilitated leadership for digital transformation in these sectors. As all other countries and cities are doing, we are trying to recover jobs lost. Cordoba is not an exception. Argentina is beginning to recover formal jobs. The industry, building, health, software industries have been recovered. And as we saw in the case of New York, we are trying to incorporate new areas such as services, tourism, and we will launch in the next few hours the World Summit for the Circular Economy with the generation of green jobs, the great challenges faced by the world in artificial intelligence and ICTs. And this is the great opportunity we have. We have a great opportunity to create green jobs, to prepare the city for the inclusion of the orange economy, creativity, and things that are promoted constantly by the IDB. So this will be the new focus of the cities. On the issue of tourism, before the pandemics, we had about 13,000 rooms available in the city for tourists. In the worst stage of the crisis, it went down to 7,800 rooms for jobs. There was a closure of hotels. The entire sector came down. And we adopted a series of actions, and now we have 9,000 rooms. We have now temporary lodging, and also we promoted a very active policy geared toward the promotion of public events, uh, road races, sporting events at a national level, meetings, seminars, summits, such as the one we are going to have in the future. And we try to promote the city through these events in order to try to recover at a very quick pace, the lodging for tourists that was lost because of the pandemic. And with these 8 lines of actions, we have implemented a series of policies of actions that are geared toward the economic development of the city. But as a mayor, I would like to uh, underline the great job the other speakers are doing. And these agencies lead us through these efforts so that the measures we take from the point of view of the agencies can be legitimized, they can be supported. And when the public and private sectors cooperate, we can overcome barriers and accelerate transformation. It's very difficult to do so with the participation of the public sector alone. So those cities that do not have development agencies uh, are mistaken, because these are a very good element for the cooperation of the two sectors and for the improvement of the lives of our population. So thank you very much to the IDB. It's a pleasure for me to have been able to discuss these issues with you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. He gives us a very good overview of the need to establish a series of public-private partnerships to improve the use of the assets of the city for the benefit of its inhabitants. We will now have a very short question and answer period, and we have a question for each and every one of our speakers. I will have these questions in English, and then I will ask a question for the mayor in Spanish.
You made a good explanation, gave a good presentation about the policy perspective and the different priorities and topics that are necessary to contemplate in the performance and creation, performance, and management of local economic development agencies. But there is an issue, particularly in our region, which is trust. How can you generate credibility in those strategies and projects that these agencies promote vis-a-vis the private sector and the civil society? How can you generate that credibility of the local economic development agencies for the rest of the agents in the city?
Roberto, was there an order you wanted us to go in, or?
Yeah, this is for you, Karen.
Okay, great. I think this is a really interesting question, and a lot of the issues I wanted to raise also were really about sort of having plans that are fact-based and that are grounded in reality, because I think this really is an opportunity to serve as a communication platform. And there are a lot of local economic development strategies that say we will be the #1 this, or we will be the top here, or we're going to be the next, Silicon Valley of something, or equivalent. There is a little bit of skepticism associated with that, and that's why I think this opportunity to show the capacity that there is, and in collaboration with others in getting the kind of relevant data, knowing where it makes sense, knowing where this is maybe misguided, but also I think the issue of inclusion, and I'm talking more on the broader economic development firm side than on the real estate side, which has its own other set of specific issues for community buy-in. But I think this is an area where communications wasn't necessarily a strength of all of these agencies, but increasingly there are demands for this. And so we have seen this, for example, when local economic development agencies have been helping in post-disaster regions after a hurricane, et cetera, where the demands are very extreme and where there's a desire for more visibility and scoreboards. But I think it's really this convening power and being seen as not pushing particularly agenda, but bringing people together to get that agenda based on that data. And there's all sorts of new interesting data sources out there that local agencies can use, and social media and all sorts of other metrics that are exciting that can be brought in. And then again, this attention to who is at the table and making sure that that inclusion and diversity is represented in these convenings. And I think those will be really important for the credibility. And just to highlight, of course, the time horizon and trying to get people inspired, because the time horizons are sometimes longer term than what people think they need to see immediately. And so getting people around this inspiration so they can be a bit patient to see the results is going to be also very important.
Thank you, Karen. Mr. Detter, this question is for you. Let's say you are standing in front of a mayor of, say, Buenos Aires, Mexico City, Medellin, Lima, Córdoba, or Guadalajara, or many other cities, metropolitan cities in our region. What would be the three main principles that you will emphasize as recommendations to maximize the value and the yield of the assets of the city, to be able to invest that value commercially in the economic growth and job creation and urban regeneration?
Right. Well, first of all, I think it's important to do the asset map to get an idea of what kind of assets you have. And that asset map should result in finding assets that are worth at least 1 times GDP or economic output of that city. Most likely equivalent to half the total property market in the city. If you find less, you have probably missed some assets. You should also go through whether you have operational assets like a subway, airport, harbor, or anything like this that can be used. And then from there on, it's more to sit down and strategize, what would be politically possible to put into a holding company. Or financially or technically, this is not rocket science. I mean, this is done in the private sector every day, and it's been done for 100 years in the public sector. It's all about political will. So the political leadership has to be, keen on doing this, having the political will to do it, having the strength to do it, the personality to do it, but most likely also having the financial need to do it. Otherwise, I mean, it's politically, this is not very easy. Usually it's not very easy. In some cities, it's more easy than others. US cities are particularly difficult because they have so many, their ownership is so fragmented, because they have a very messy governance structure with special districts and all kinds of things. So it really depends, but it's with political will, everything is possible.
Thank you, Mr. Detter. Cecilia, this question is for you. How can a local economic development agency identify what are the correct incentives to produce beneficial public-private partnerships for the city?
Thank you. So I think part of, and that's very true from what Doug just said, I think like we often misunderstand our own strength. So what we're trying to rethink now, and crisis help having to really focus that way. So trying to not waste the moment that we're in, which is what is the competitive advantage of New York City? Like, why would people want to be here? And so it's really interesting, as I mentioned earlier, what we're really hearing is not like, we're not competitive on the tax base. We're not competitive on, the price of living here. We're like a lot more expensive than other US cities. So a lot of what we're hearing from companies is talent and diverse talent, and the colliding of really smart people from around the world that give innovation and creates innovation. And this is why they want to be here. And this is why their workforce that, with generation changing, that tends to be younger. This is also why they want to be in a place like New York City, even though economically it might not be the cheapest or the easiest place for them to live. And so I think being very clear that these are our strengths, rather than trying to be competitive on things that, like, naturally it's going to be extremely hard for us to be competitive in. I think it has been a big lessons learned, because we're a very large city and have, and as Dak said, like a fairly fragmented from a regulatory perspective. It's actually fairly difficult for companies to come here and do business compared to other places in the nation. So what we've creating this business development desk has become really important. Like, we were able to, during the pandemic, JetBlue, who is a very large employer, the airline company, wanted to move to Florida. And so we, thousands of jobs for New York City, they were in Long Island City and Queens. We pulled a team together that really tried to understand what their issues were, none of which were, we need more tax incentive. All of which were, we're having this issue with the fire department in that building. We're having this issue with the Department of Building in that building. We think like our employees are not going to want to come back to the office because like crime is too high around our subway station. Like, there were just a large collection of small issues that each belonged to a different place in city governments. And what we did is to tell them, one, we hear you. Two, we're going to bring everyone together and go through your list of issues systematically, and come up with micro solutions that are responsive to your needs. And three, we are here to serve you. We are not like blasé about the fact that like we are a very big city, you're a very big employer, and it's really important that you stay, both in terms of the number of jobs and symbolically at the time where New York City was. And so we found that this type of approach has been fairly effective. And again, that often the tax incentive doesn't necessarily even enter the conversation. We just need to facilitate lots of coordination with a lot of different actors, and only government can do that.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Finalmente, Intendente.
Finally, Mayor Yarlora, my question to you is, how can the economic strategy of a city as Córdoba be linked to job generation and to an inclusive urban regeneration in Córdoba through an agency such as ADEC? I refer to what Doug said when he was talking about the political will you need, but then when you take decisions, agencies cooperate a lot in the legitimization of those decisions through PPPs, and are the decisions we had to take in the public mapping in the city to determine where we can set up an industry or housing, or where some things cannot be done. We are also advancing in initiatives to develop sectors with great potential. And with ADEC, we will be working in the presentation of many initiatives addressed to sectors that have changed activity or have potential vis-a-vis some work we are conducting. So in the next few months, we will have a conversation with the private sector through the agency to work or to implement initiatives that will have to be approved by our municipal council to incentivize the generation of employment generation through different initiatives with great potential, clearly linked to a new development idea of livable cities for people. For example, now we have a program called Córdoba Respira, Córdoba Breathes. So we are renovating or revaluing our historic center. There's no country or no big city that is not rethinking city as a more livable space with public areas for its inhabitants, but also to be attractive not only for its inhabitants but also for tourists. We are working around our historic center, working with the European Union to improve, to enhance, reactivate our historic center. I don't want to stray from this topic, but the attendees who are listening to this webinar, I invite those who still don't have their own development agencies. I invite them to create them because private work is very important to conduct work that sometimes exceeds the capabilities of governments themselves. That's the road that cities have to follow. We have to base our work on previous studies, but development agencies are a helpful mechanism to help us, urban authorities, to continue developing our cities, such as Karen and Cecilia said, the possibility to legitimize public policies to help us move ahead, to overcome barriers that otherwise would be very difficult, because there's a great challenge of breaking paradigms and reduce bureaucracy. That involves leadership that has to be done at the public and private sector together. So thank you very much, Gilberto, for moderating this. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And we are getting to the end of this seminar, or this webinar. We'll go to the closing. I invite our colleague Rafael Matas Trillos from IDB Invest, which is the private arm of the IDB. He's a specialist of renewable infrastructure at IDB Invest. He's been working for the IDB group since 2007 with transport projects, water and sanitation in Latin America and elsewhere. He has great experience in the Andean region and the Southern Cone, and also he's worked in Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, and Brazil. He also worked at the IDB local office in the Dominican Republic, and he structured PPPs both in the Dominican Republic and in Jamaica with this great experience. And to bring the look of the private sector to this discussion, we gave the floor to Rafael Matas Trillos.
Thank you all.
To close.
Good morning. Thanks a lot, Maria Camila and Gilberto, for inviting me. I mean, thanks to Karen, Martin, Cecilia, Doug for the interventions. I'm just looking here at the, well, I mean, this is IDB group, no? But I mean, I'm looking here at the Zoom, there's 600 participants. I mean, this is, for me, this is great. So congratulations for the event, and thank you very much for inviting me. As Gilberto mentioned, I work at the IDB Invest, the private sector group, the private sector arm of the IDB group. I head the Andean region for the infrastructure and energy and energy division. For us, private sector group, private sector division means that we finance with no sovereign guarantee, basically. So we finance with recourse to the projects. We finance with recourse to the corporations with no sovereign guarantee. In our division, we finance four main sectors, which are energy, which is mainly renewable energy at this moment, decarbonization, which is turning like kind of very decisively towards those sectors. Like there was a lot talked today about green cities, energy efficiency, whatnot. So that's where the cities are going, and that's exactly and precisely where we're going. Infrastructure, like thought of like classic infrastructure, social infrastructure, which are mainly like education and health, and water and sanitation. Together very tightly with Maria Camila and Gilberto, we're championing, we're developing, moving towards like sustainable cities, smart cities in the private sector of the bank. Which is the concept here? I mean, I think that we want to leverage on all the knowledge that we have in terms of like this group expertise on sustainable cities in order just to do more business with cities, do more business with like with SOEs. No, in that sense, we're looking, and this is like kind of starting process, and this is a work in progress, but we have a very clear idea of what we want to do. Now, we want just to do more private sector, more business with cities in the areas of renewable energy, energy efficiency, smart metering of energy and water, for example, water and sanitation, waste management. We talked about, obviously encapsulates all what I said, green economy or tourism. What's the structure that we're looking for? We're looking for good credits. So, I mean, the cities or the vehicles need to be bankable. Here it comes, very important what Doug mentioned before. In principle, through charter, we don't finance directly municipalities, but we do vehicles that are like kind of dependent on municipalities. So that's very important, like kind of a bankable, well-structured vehicle. We're going to take some security. The way we're seeing it, in order to be bankable, like certain pledge on some very clear defined receivables. I think that we would be seeing that as the way to make these projects bankable themselves. I want to put you a very quick example. For Reactivating, this is a water and sanitation. This is private, but this is something that we want to replicate. Reactivating is a water company, which parent is Brookfield, which together we did a very important water and sanitation project in Fortaleza in the north of Brazil for like basically sanitation services. Okay. What we did, basically, the off-taker is a public company, but there we created a trust in which the water revenues from the end users, the receivables from the end users, come to a trust. We get paid. Once we get paid, the rest of the waterfall goes to the public utility. These are the structures that we're looking into. No? So next steps, what we want to do together with our colleagues of sustainable cities, what we want to do is, first of all, map the cities where we want to make an impact. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. And the second step for us, and this is why this forum is so great, we want to see projects. We want to analyze projects, and this is the right place for us just to, I think, to get them. So Maria Camila and Gilberto, they have my contacts. We would like just to see, like, please contact us with projects of this similar structure that I mentioned and the sectors that you think that we could fit. And we're going to analyze them. We're going to get back to you. This is a process in which we're going to be triaging certain projects, certain cities. But I mean, this is great for us. And we got a lot of ideas from these interventions. And well, thank you very much for the space, for the time. And do reach out, because we want just to get, as per the private sector side of the banking coordination of the group, we want to be doing more business with the municipalities and in the sectors we mentioned. So thank you very much all.
Thank you, Rafael. Right on time and right on topic. Muchas gracias a todos los participantes. Hemos tenido 600.
Thank you very much to all participants. We have had 600 participants connected to this link. We will try to translate these the presentations from English to Spanish and to share them with the rest of the participants in this webinar. We thank you on behalf of the city network of the IDB, the division of housing and urban development. And we thank you all for your dedication and attention to these urban development challenges and issues that could be solved through good projects to solve the most pressing problems in the cities of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thanks for your attention. Have a nice day. And hopefully you'll be healthy and you will recover from the pandemic. Thank you.
Gracias.